Wall! Screamed Mario, covering his face with his hands. Gio threw the wheel sharply to the right-hand side and then jabbed the brakes and then the accelerator to try and make something happen. The car bit into the ground with a ferocity that neither Gio or Mario had ever experienced. The car savagely bucked back the other way like a wild stallion attempting to dismount its rider. "Mama!" shrieked Mario with the power and conviction of an operatic soprano. There was no stopping what was about to happen. At still over 50 miles per hour, the rear end span round and crashed hard into the dry stone wall, smashing the brake lights, ripping off the bumper and crushing a section of the rear wing. The car scrubbed its way backwards down the wall at speed until it had completed a 180-degree turn, then jolted to a brutal stop, snapping Gio's and Mario's heads forward. The car began to roll backwards down the hill towards the flimsy iron fence that stood between them and the 100-foot drop into a valley ravine below. Gio regained his senses and stamped on the pedal. He held it firm, not moving. Mario and Gio sat looking up the hill. Mario opened the door and vomited on the road. With hands shaking, Gio took a cigarette from the packet in the door pocket. He flipped the top of his Zippo and lit it, and inhaled deeply. With his free hand, he slowly pulled on the parking brake and lifted his foot off the brake pedal. The car lurched upwards an inch or two on the cable, then settled. The Motor Rosso had made it cleanly through the corner and continued to accelerate down the straight. It was clear to Gio that the corner had been far gentler and could have been taken at much higher speeds. I should have studied the course better, he thought, and he chastised himself. Mario, wiping vomit off his chin, looked at Gio in silence and then stumbled out of the car. He walked to the back of the Red to look at the damage, holding one hand on her to steady his walk. The taillight was gone and the car had a deep gouge running all the way down to the rear quarter panel that ended with a small kink in the sills below the door. The rear wing said nothing about the ferocity of the impact, thought Mario. "Come take a look," said Mario. Gio climbed slowly from the car and stood beside Mario. He continued to draw heavily on his cigarette. His hands were still shaking. His hair was wet with sweat. He ran his hand over the kink in the sill. "It's ruined," said Gio. "It's not so bad. I can bang that out with a hammer. I've fixed worse," said Mario reassuringly as he lit a cigarette and began to smoke hard. They leaned, backs on the side of the car, smoking and contemplating their near-death experience. "What a fool I've been. I'm so sorry, Mario. I could have got you killed tonight," said Gio. "I just risked our lives racing an unknown car on an unknown road." "Well, I don't think they are going to be unknown for much longer. I think he knows all about this road, and look, he's coming back to tell us about it," replied Mario, pointing towards the small pair of lights winding their way back towards them in the distance. After a few minutes, they watched as the lights of the Motor Rosso appeared from the corner at the bottom of the long straight. Gio ran back to the open door and jumped in. Mario followed, hoping for a quick getaway. Gio reached for the ignition, but instead of starting the engine and driving away, he just watched in the rearview mirror as it came towards them. "What are you doing? Go, Gio! Get us the hell out of here!" shouted Mario. The Motor Rosso's headlights were pointed at them. Gio turned and looked directly out of the rear window. The lights snapped up and down abruptly. He wondered exactly how hard the suspension must be to make them bounce so violently like that. The light swept onto his face and he raised a hand to cover his eyes. The Motor Rosso stopped behind them, its very bright headlights still blazing into the Mistral's rear window. They watched as the door opened and a figure stepped out, in silhouette, and walked towards them. Gio turned and wound down his window in anticipation of whatever abuse was coming their way. A face appeared at the window. Gio looked and his eyes opened wider to get a better look. She was the most beautiful woman Gio had ever seen. He leaned out of the window and gave her the once-over. She must have stood 6 foot in black leather boots and a white leather one-piece race suit. A bright red stripe ran vertically down each side. Her long black hair was fastened up behind her head in a neat ponytail. The racing suit was open to the waist, revealing her toned, slender figure. Underneath, she wore a tight-fitting red t-shirt displaying the famous badge of Motor Rosso. The blazing red background featured a black silhouetted knight upon a striding war horse. The knight was holding a long lance and appeared to be riding into battle. That was the logo of the Motor Rosso Motor Company of Modena, Italy. It was the second most famous motor company in Italy, after Ferroruota. Had a good look? She said coolly, calling him out. Hello, I'm sorry about that. I thought you were the police, said Gio with his most charming, hustling smile. This road is off limits to amateurs during the Targa. You pair of idiots could have got us killed, replied the driver abruptly. Off limits? Who the hell does she think she is? Shouted Mario from the passenger seat. She could have got us killed driving like that? Does her husband know she's out driving his car? Gio sat speechless, slightly embarrassed as Mario delivered his chauvinistic tirade to her. Father teach you to talk that way, did he? She shouted back as she leaned into the window. Just before he beat up your mama for making a lousy pasta? Mario leapt from the car and ran around the back, waving his arms and calling her all kinds of terrible things. She stood like a rock, arms folded, and began to laugh. Gio sighed and got out of the car. Laughing at Mario didn't usually turn out well. Mario, stop it! Come back here! Shouted Gio. Mario stopped and they both looked at Gio. Gio finally got a clear look at her face. You're Lisa Del Monaco, aren't you? Said Gio. Mario gasped. Lisa Del Monaco. Oh, I'm so sorry, I never realized, said Mario. Save it for the police, boys. I've heard it all before, Lisa replied. You drive excellently, and if may I say, you are really quite beautiful, said Gio, smiling. For a racing driver? She said, finishing his words. Gio stopped talking and his face turned red. She just stood there silently, arms still folded, glowering into Gio's eyes with intense hatred. All her life she had dealt with these kinds of arrogant and condescending men. Neither of them spoke, and for a few moments they found themselves locked in a stare-out with each other. Gio broke first and pulled out a packet of cigarettes, lit one, then offered her one. He leaned casually against the car, trying to look cool, drawing on the tricks he used with the mature women in Palermo. She just shook her head contemptuously and walked past them to inspect the damage on the red Mistral. Lisa looked at them both and laughed. Stay off the road, or next time I'll make sure I run you down that ravine, and if you get killed, then that'd be all the better for everyone. I'll be performing a service to the community, and especially womankind, she said, looking at Mario. You guys think because you have a pair of balls, you are natural-born race drivers. I see your sort all of the time. Give it up, boys, before you get someone killed. Someone important, like me.